employment, in terms of wages, we see in the labor market. So institutions or governments try to think that how do we correct for this? One of the institutional way to correct for this is to make quotas. We all know about this. There's a different kind of quota, the gender quota. So Norway was the first country to implement a gender. As I said, in Scandinavian things in a different way, and Norway did it in 2003 or 2003. Yes, 2003. And what they did was they required 40% of the Norwegian directors to be women. And at the time when they did, it was only 9%. Even a country like Norway, 2002, the country like women, they had only 9% of their directors as women. The increase is to 40%. Why? Because the problem other is, if you do not utilize this kind of law to understand how women or what increase the value of the farm along with the woman participation, the problem is in equilibrium. It is difficult to distinguish if knowledgeable board members increase farm value through their actions, or if highly valued firms simply attract knowledgeable board members. You don't know which way it works. The value drives the board members, or the board members drive the value. Then this kind of law comes in, which is kind of a quasi-natural experimental policy, and you can use this policies to determine what happens in an institutional case. So what they do, they present new evidence on the relationship between farm value and board characteristics by exploiting this experiment on board structure. What they find is that 10% increase of women representation in the board led to about decline in topping skill value from the average. And results are consistent with the hypothesis that boards are chosen to maximize shareholder value, and imposing a constraint like this on the choice of directors led to an economically large declines in value. So they found this policy led to not increase in the farm value. They increase in some other aspects, but not the farm value per se, because the shareholders, there is a constraint on choosing your directors now. You cannot freely choose. Your choice is not free in a sense that you have to choose a woman, 40% of the woman. So that's why the farm value went down, not up. They use similar, Marian Bertrand used exactly the same reform and found that no robust, they found that the gender gap earnings within the boards, within the upper management actually fell. The wage gap between a female director, a male director, a female executive director, a male executive director, these gender wage gap started falling down after the policy was initiated. But they did not find any evidence that the reform benefited the largest set of women employed in the farms. So they did not find that when women are coming in the top of the board, that the women in gap in employment in, let's say, water level, which are working in production, that did not go up, or they did not change at all. So, and they found mixed support in terms of the reform affecting the decisions of the young women. So what they found was they did not find any change in the enrollment in business education by female, but saw some improvements in labor outcomes for young women with graduate degrees. People who are with graduate degrees in terms of business and degrees in the early stage careers, there are some improvement in their employment and stuff. But enrollment, in a sense, why we are looking at enrollment? Because this reform has a larger social perspective. Right now, if I'm choosing business degrees, this kind of degrees, that means that I can be promoted to the director of a firm somewhere down the line in the future, but that did not change. There was no kind of social effect of that law. In a small society, social effects are higher because this is, in a sense of the term, what I mean small means in terms of the population. So this reach of any kind of law is far higher than a large society like India. So they did not find any kind of social effect of that law on business programs, but saw some improvements with the early career stage. So we conclude that overall, 7 years after the board quota policy fully came into effect, the study finds that it had very little effect on women in business beyond its direct effect on women who went into the board. So there was effect, but not a considerable widening effect of that law. This is also with this Norwegian law, and they found that the farms which are listed also had a drop in their operating profits in the productivity by assets as well. All of this you can see listed 2006, listed with post everyone when they are doing 2006 law with the listed with farm with Norway listed 2006, they found a significant actually drop in the farm value in terms of the operating profit. So there is no consistent evidence. They found it for Norway, but if you see for other countries in terms of operating profits, they do not find any evidence. So this is not consistent across different change. You can see when there is change in debt, that they found a bit of drop change in debt, but that's not significant. There is, so we are talking of the financial performance, debt, borrowing, that you tend to reduce your debt, you tend to change your borrowing pattern. They do find some negative evidence, but that's not significant. So there are different ways where women participation in the top management actually affects farm differently. In terms of profits and stuff, there is negative effect, there is no effect as well. So it's not consistent. In changing financial performance, which is debt and stuff, this is pretty much the way, it's not significant, but pretty much the way where the theory identifies how it should be. This is Italian reform. Italy has a reform on again with the female board directors, and what they found is when you are looking, there is no effect actually. This is not this is event study again. They do not find, they divide the farms into sizes, and they do not find anything below the third quarter. This is red is for the female. Below the third quartile, there is no effect. The big farms, there is an effect on the wages, but not for the small farms. And there is a significant decline in the female wages. So you can see if you divide it by median and above, see the p-value. Above the median farms have a significant increase in their farm level female wage earnings, which is pretty similar when you're comparing this side. The 10th decile, which is the biggest part, has a significant increase. So the p-value you can see 0.004, right? Less than 0.005. Quartiles is exactly no effect, no effect, no effect. Once you go to the fourth quartile, there are effects for all workers. So everything concentrates here actually in the fourth quarter. There is effect, no effect anywhere, but everything concentrates in the fourth quarter. The other one I want to show you, other result is, this is actually, you should read the one we're talking about. So see this female leadership, sales per employee and value added per employee. Okay, this is a female leadership. And you can find there is almost sales per employee, no effect, but value added per employee, there's a negative effect. PSP also, there's a negative effect. Okay, when there's female leadership, what is this interaction? There's a multiple interaction. This is exactly what we were discussing here. The interaction here is when there's a female leadership along with a female manager. You can see the results go either way. Actually, sales increases, value added per employee increases, PFP increases. So when there is an interaction between the female leadership, the female manager, or a female manager who is managing the production, it goes the other way. That when you have similar kind of thought process in an organization, an organized production process, then might flip. So it gives you the intuition that not only you have to change the upper level change only is not sufficient or necessary enough to correct for everything else.
So you said that if one female owner employs a female manager.
Female leadership means female, there's a CEO or in the board, and there is a, if they're in that firm, there's a female manager. When you're working with the female, and they also work with different female leadership, fraction of female executives as well, and that also increases. So they use, if there's a female manager or the share of female managers are higher, then it flips the other way. With the female leadership, with set of female managers going higher, then you have positive effects. So it basically gives you the idea, economic intuition, that one correction needs a holistic approach to correct it. To correct just at the top level, it doesn't correct for everything. You need a holistic participation at every different levels. More of the women that to correct or to have better performance, better productivity, better profits, better something, everything at the firm level. So this is Italian reform. The other one, this is Indian. So the only paper I found out in India was this paper by Jayati Sarkar from IGIDR in Emerging Markets Review 2021. They found that women director has, so you can see Dobinsky women directors has a positive effect. And this effect, positive effect on Dobinsky, there's a positive effect on return on assets. And this effect is significantly driven by women directors on family firms. So this is Indian evidence. We just saw the Robinsky as a negative effect in Norway, in Norwegian case, and this is a completely opposite effect. So that's why I'm saying that in terms of farms value, there is not consistent evidence across countries, because there is no theoretical actually reason. That's why it's an empirical question. There's no theoretical reason what you should expect in terms of farm value. Why would women come and farm value increase? There's no consistent evidence. There's no theoretical, like one way of saying it. There could be many ways of saying theoretical reason. So empirical evidences say one way, some way, and the other. You're just saying Norway and India has completely different effects of women directors. And in fact, women independent directors also has a significant Dobinsky effect, both as ROA effects. But all of these come from mostly from the family. You can see the coefficients are higher, significantly higher for a family-owned farm rather than all farm. So it's basically its effect is dominated by the family, the women directors in the family-owned farms in India. So this is more or less about gender, farm and stuff. Let me quickly shift to the trade and gender a bit. There are many things you can work on gender. I have started working on trade and gender with the current. I'm trying to work on other parts of gender. We are now looking at gendered environment in a paper, because there is theoretical or empirical evidences which shows that women are more concerned about the environment than men. They're more concerned about social causes than men. In fact, there's a paper, if you want to look up, there is a paper right now. This girl, I forgot what is her name? Bipasha Maiti, I guess, from Ashoka. She has a paper showing that the places in India which had women legislators, I mean women MLAs or MPs, in those regions, conservation of forest area went up more than places which had men MLAs and MPs. Or destruction or deforestation went down less rather than male MLA and MPs. It's an interesting paper. You have read the paper, right? This is an interesting paper. And this actually led us to think more to work on the other. We are trying to look at more at the farm level, because I do farms. But this is an interesting idea actually to have an empirical evidence that we will think about environment, we will think about social causes differently rather than that. Which could be a simply, I don't know, it's nurtured or it's nature. And it's very difficult to say that by default women are that way different than men, or it's a nurturing of by the parents of the girl child is different than the nurturing of the male child by the parents. It's very difficult, but this is pretty much empirical evidence we see. This is the outcome. We don't see the causes of it. It's very difficult to determine the causes of it, but the outcome is more or less there is a significant difference, and we're trying to find out now whether we see at the firm level and get some data set where we can find some women leadership data.
So there is evidence that female-led farms, they are more environmental friendly than male-led farms.
Oh, there is. Yes. Oh, but can you send me the paper? I would love to have a look. Because we are now theorizing this, and then we can love to have read this. Okay, thank you. See, so what I would present to you a bit about trade, why liberalization policy, globalization can affect gender the intuition is very simple. We have done Mellett's. Intuition builds on the premise of the heterogeneous trade theory models. Fundamentally, they talk about why trade would affect gender. Think about theoretically, there is a lower cost of entering foreign markets. Now, if you're writing an FTA, for example, if you know, India recently wrote an FTA with UK, right? The U there's a lower cost that the FTA means you now sell to the Indian firms and sell to the UK market without any tariffs. So that is your variable cost going down, your cost of production going down. So you have a less cost to enter the foreign markets. Or you can import new intermediate inputs. When your input tariffs go down, you can import more inputs from abroad, high quality inputs, and these both, either of these or both, can induce firms to invest in new technologies. It can be both domestic, it can be foreign, or it can try to innovate new products. For example, you can think about this FTA India. When Indian firms are going to the UK market to sell, you have to think about new products because you have to differentiate it in the market to get a market share. You cannot just come and sell whatever the products are existing in the market because these are products that are existing in the market in high quality. So you have to think about a differentiated product. And differentiation product, when you have, we were discussing this, diversity helps in innovation. And so you might need more women to think about or diversity in terms of at the top level or at the managerial level to think about more innovative products, new products, engaging more marketing, publicity of those products, promotional activities, and that requires completely different amounts and types of skills. So there are theories or anecdotal evidences which says that women are more good in soft skills, productive soft skills rather than men. So if you think about also, forget about everything, if you think about marketing, publicity, or promotional activities, which requires high cognitive soft skills, it requires high cognitive skills also, because you have to know a lot of knowledge, you have to have a lot of knowledge, but it requires soft skills, which women might have better than the men. These are empirical evidences, and that would kind of promote the women or more employment of the women in those farms which are trying to sell in the foreign market. And if production will require more intensive use of this task, which we are discussing, that is a non-production in nature because you are not related directly with production, right? Require high cognitive ability and physically less demanding. These are where women have competitive advantage according to a lot of papers. This is obviously not exhaustive. Then an expansion in these activities will increase the demand for women, females for farms, and compared to others. And this has significant spillover effects on both the labor productivity and overall productivity of a farm. So this is fine. This is more or less like the intuition behind why trade would increase. There are other ways to increase. Trade can actually reduce discrimination. We will come to this. Trade can actually reduce discrimination. And we'll see why trade would reduce discrimination. This comes from the fundamental theory or book by Nobel laureate Gary Becker called Economic Service. So these are startling examples. What Gary Becker talks about is when you have increase in product market competition, when foreign, think about in India, when foreign firms started to sell in the market, when foreign competition goes up, what happens the first one? What gets hit? Firm's profit. When firm's profit gets hit, the Gary Baker argues there is market power that goes down. And there is a positive relationship between market power and positive discrimination. When I have higher market power, I can discriminate. When I have lower market power, my bargaining power of discrimination goes down. When you have foreign competition, the firms now tend to, because the profits go down, the firms now tend to could employ more different kinds of workers, in this case females, rather than males. You can argue that the females work for lower wages than males. That could be one reason to drive this change. That could be absolutely true. Or the farms might started to think in a different fashion. That could also be true. That if I have more females, let's try it out with females rather than see how can I increase my profits. How can I survive this competition? So it can work either way. It can work because females settling lower wages or the average wage of a female worker is lower than male. That's absolutely a very empirical evidence. There is, we have seen this even for the high top farms of the world. This could drive that I have less profits. I want to give my workers less wages, so I employ more. In a way, yeah, you are getting lower wages, but overall, socially, there's a correction of the gender gap in employment. On the other way, the firms can think in innovative ways, that I need innovative ways to gain back my market share, or can innovate products, or do different things than the other one that I'm currently doing where I got hit because of common competition. And one way to do that, I have diverse work environments. So I employ female more. So this is a strong prediction by Gary Baker, and that profits, because a firm must forego profits in order to indulge in a test for discrimination, employers will considerable market power, will be better able to practice discrimination than those with little market power. And that happens with trade. Trade brings in competition, increase foreign market competition in industry or region over time, that can reduce earnings and employment disparities between men and women. This is the channel that the employers now cannot discriminate more because of foreign competition. There is a paper also in Journal of International Economics, which says that when in Korea, I guess Korea or China, most probably Korea, when the multinationals took up some of the domestic firms, the female employment went up because there was a culture transfer from the multinationals to the local firms. Because multinational firms has a culture of having more equal, balanced workforce. And when they took over in the domestic firms, some of the domestic firms saw this culture of transfer from the MNCs, that the European firms went and take up these firms. And I am a domestic firm, and I know these people in the firms, and I've seen in that MNC when they took up that domestic firm, the share of women workers going up, I tend to correct myself. So transfer of culture also, because these are also FDI. So you can think of this as also trade, because this is FDI happening. When a foreign firm is coming in with FDI, it is also correcting for the domestic taste for discrimination. So trade, in terms of exposure, in terms of competition, also corrects for discrimination in the domestic scenario. So that's how globalization or exposure, that we say, was important. It's absolutely, there is inequality in some way. We have seen this wage inequality increases, but if you talk about the gender, it's sometimes correct for, there is also different experiences, but there is also strong evidence that it corrects for the gender discrimination in the domestic country where you have the exposure to globalization. This is what, so the first paper actually to come out was, by Sandra Black, and I forgot her first name, Brainerd. They're talking about importing in, yes, sorry. This one.
You said we increase the competition in the product market. Discrimination against women and minorities in long run. So the product market has everything to do with it, or we also need to look at the labor market.
No, product market, it has to do with the product market.
Because if
Because the
you
competition comes in the product market with globalization, not with the labor market. Product market
but
means
if you are a producer, then you are also engaged with the labor market. Because for production, you need labor. And without labor, you won't be able to produce and supply in the product market. So that's why I'm asking, does it really have to do anything with the labor market, or it's just about the product?
no, when you open up an economy, the competition first comes is the product market competition. There is labor market competition after that. But when you open an economy, the first competition that you face in economy, it's not talking about here, it's any economy when you open it up, you have the things you face is that product market competition, because that is driving everything. What is essentially happening is different set of firms coming in your market to sell. Product competition goes up. Then that is driving your labor market changes or labor market competition or whatever. But if
FDI coming, then what happens?
FDI also, like globalization, not product market competition, it's a globalization. But it can be also product market competition, FDI, because if a firm owned by an MNC, it might perform better in the product market while you are a domestic firm selling. Because now there's a transfer of knowledge from the MNC to the domestic firm, and that transfer of knowledge is restricted to that particular domestic firm and not to you. So they know now, they have experience, they have exposure to better managers who is sitting abroad. They can just pick up a phone or a Zoom call or a Teams call, they can call, and they can have talk to people who have better experience in the global market. And you don't. So that their knowledge transfer can intensify the competition in the domestic market. And then you are hit because of that. It could be. And then you try and change your labor market stuff. Yes, there is labor market competition when you are allowing free movement of labor. Only there. It's only in Europe. There is nowhere there's labor market. Europe wrote the European Union agreement, which is also a trade agreement, but that also included free movement of labor across borders. It's only in Europe that satisfies, nowhere else. Here, if you have to, like from an European nation, let's say I have a France passport, I can go just to Belgium and can work. You cannot do that in any other part of the world. You do not have to pay any visa, you do not have to do anything. You just get a job and go and stay there. That's about it. So the labor market competition has actually there because of the trade agreement, not anywhere.
But if we specifically talk about India, then
Specifically talk about India.
there is any specific sector, like manufacturing or whatever. So we have actual GDP within the firms.
Within the firms because of the occupation
Within the firms,
among the firms.
Yes. So due to that heterogeneity, we don't see the movement of labor from one firm to other.
Mhm.
And if there is no mobility, then we won't be able to
Then,
increase the standards of the labor.
if there is no mobility, you will not increase the standards of the labor. But when you are faced with competition, you want to reorganize your workforce, right? When you are reorganizing your workforce, you are letting go of certain set of people, you are getting new set of people. Let's say some people are retiring also. You want to fill that up. For example, you are not firing anyone, for example, but you always have some people retiring from the farm. You want to replace those, with female workers. That could be possible because you have product market competition now and you want pay to lower wages, you want to diversify because you have higher product market competition in the market.
So one thing, does the product market has anything to do with the labor?
In this case, no. Product market means when you are going out to the sell in the market, that's called a product. Farms face the competition from the product market. First, with globalization, we are talking about globalized trade here. Various labor market competition, not disallowing labor market competition. With trade, labor market competition doesn't intensify, doesn't get intensified with trade. The shock comes to the product market. that might induce labor market competition. I'm not absolutely saying that is not true. I'm saying with trade, the globalization first effect comes in the product market, because that's where it opens up. The product market is getting open up. It's not the employment per se is getting open up. Okay. There could be labor market competition, absolutely. Because now, let's say, also in India, let's say there are MNCs are concentrated. For example, if I take your logic, MNCs are concentrated for say in Mumbai. If you go to Mumbai to work in MNCs, there is labor market competition. But it happened because the product market opened up. Like on the other side of Europe is China. You know the ecosystem in China? Have you ever heard of? So to create so that the labor market competition doesn't happen, they have created a system called hukou. In a sense, for example, here, let's say you want to find a job in Delhi or Mumbai. You take your boxes, you take a train, you go to Mumbai or Delhi, stay with your friend or get a rent, and start looking for a job. It doesn't happen in China. It cannot happen in China. To move to Beijing, Shanghai, and the big cities, they need a permit to stay in that city, and the permit comes from the employer. So to kill that labor market competition so that everyone doesn't move to bigger cities, they created this permit system. It's a very interesting thing. There are many papers on ecosystem. That how do you restrict this? Because otherwise, the bigger cities will be overburdened with labor, which happened actually. That's why all the jobs move to now, because now we see a bit of movement from the tier 1 cities to the tier 2 cities. Now we have started moving, seeing, let's say, tier 2 cities, let's say Indore has a lot of companies going to Indore, because bigger cities are kind of getting jam-packed. You do not have anything in the bigger cities in terms of the per capita infrastructure a person would enjoy in a bigger city. Let's say the 5 bigger cities that India has significantly gone down in the last 20 years. Like Bangalore has officially run out of water, for example. Chennai has run out of water. So as a person, when living in the city, you have to completely depend on water mafia, right? Who is controlling the water of the cities. Because your groundwater level has gone down so much, there is no official supply of groundwater. So you are uncertain whether water is coming in the cities or not. So this is one example I'm saying. That what I mean is the per capita infrastructure in terms of your space, in terms of the growth, what you enjoy is completely. So that now we see a bit of movement, natural. So this is natural movement from the farms, from the tier 1 cities to the tier 2 cities. The first tier 2 city actually moved, that is also exhausted, is Pune. Pune was the first tier 2 cities to actually attract farms to relocate there, and people have relocated I cannot think of any other tier 2 city which has kind of as agglomeration of firms like Pune. Now it is coming up a bit, it's a natural movement, but China created this movement very constructively called ecosystem, that you cannot move from one city to another unless you have a job. Yes.
How will a person get a job?
How to?
How will a person get a job?
You apply through.
Does not move there.
You apply through advertisements. When you're called for an interview, then you get a job, then you get a permit, then you.
I have one very. So you said globalization. Globalization depends kind of the product market, and then the product market will have impacts on the labor market. So the product market and the labor market are kind of related, but with a delay. So
With a delay.
is there anything through which we can trace out those interactions between the product and the labor market? Do you know any literature about it?
Interactions by what do you have in mind when you say interactions?
Interactions means like if we have like competition in the product market, then you said this will reduce discrimination against women and minorities in the product.
So in equilibrium, if you think of an equilibrium situation, think of an equilibrium situation where there are indigenous effects from labor market to the product market. If you have higher labor market competition, then let's say you have people have better ideas. People migrated from Delhi to Mumbai with better ideas. For example, southern people migrated from Mumbai to Delhi to Mumbai with better ideas in terms of creating better products in certain firms. That actually drives product market competition higher. So in equilibrium, both is determined together. But to correct for this equilibrium endogenous problem, because labor market competition is very endogenous, it's very difficult to find out how labor market competition will. That's why we try to look for this trade globalization so that we can at least find a causal way from product market competition to labor market competition. In equilibrium, this is jointly determined for sure. You cannot, like in certain cases, it's not. So idea being using the product market competition to look for discrimination is to identify how globalization of shocks can affect labor market distortions. Labor market distortions can affect globalization, not globalization. Product market competition, that is also true. In equilibrium, it's a jointly determined. But to identify how discrimination changes, what is the causal link? Because we would like to look for policies. When we try to look for policies to change, then we have to find a causal link. Because otherwise, we will not find any policy to correct for any social changes. That's the point of the product market competition. That product market competition bring in changes so that discrimination, types of discrimination through profits, so that firms which are operating in those are behaving differently. That's right. They need to think differently based on several other factors. Could be the wage, could be their taste changes, could be discriminatory power changes, could be many ways. But if so, this was the first paper actually, importing equality. So they show that yes. So exogenous, what they show is an exogenous increase in trade reduces rents in an industry and hence reduces wages. So if male workers were enjoying more rents than female workers, the gap between the two will shrink with the increased competition. So in the competitive sector, since wages are already at the competitive level, the gender wage gap will be less affected by the increase in trade. What they show is that they divide industries into two sectors. You actually can follow this and see what is happening in India. So they divide industries between competitive sectors and concentrated sectors. One is already competitive, where there is already higher imports. They say that the wage differential between between men and women, or the wage differential in those sectors are less, because the farms are already operating on the border, on the fringe. They cannot deviate much from the profits. But where it's more concentrated, in a sense, there's less exposed. This is where the changes are coming from. When they get opened up to trade, they are facing newer competition. Then those changes, the changes that they see in these papers, this is in the US, when those sectors which are concentrated, those sectors opening up to trade, see that larger change in terms of the gender wage earnings. So you can see, I'll show you. So you can see the median female to male wage starts actually increasing. The female are getting more when the inputs to GDP ratio. This is like a motivation graph. They show when they are increasing the inputs to GDP, the female to male median wage basically is increasing. That means either females are getting more paid or males are getting less paid, and because the ratio is increasing. So that's, you can see, concentrated, basically in the concentrated industries, there's a drop in the gender wage gap. Significantly. You see weekly earnings, you see hourly earnings, you see 9-year differences, 6-year differences, whatever they do, there is a significant drop in the, and this is interacted. So this is concentrated industry interacted with change in input share. So higher the input share, the drop in the higher earnings. But you can see, interestingly, you can see this one, see that coefficient, which is the standalone coefficient of this regressions. In the concentrated industries, which are not exposed to trade much, the gender wage gaps are actually higher. That's why they are dropping. This is positive, you can see. When they interact with trade, it flips. So the industries which are not exposed to trade had higher, that means the industries which are, this standalone coefficient means the industries which are not exposed to trade before had higher gender wage gap before the globalization happened or the opening up of the trade happened. Once the imports started coming in, the gender wage gap started growing. That's why they see importing equality. Are we importing more goods from outside, which is creating equality in the labor markets? More. So imports can create inequality in this case.
Sir, suppose I want to check results uh, for an industry in India located somewhere, and it has just started opening up itself for trade. So if I want to do this, how should I do it?
You can look up. So oh my God, I have deleted it. But they have, for the sake of time, so they have this. If you go to the paper, they have the list of concentrated industries. You can match with the codes they have. You can match these codes and find out which are the concentrated industries in India, or you can look up, depending on the period, which which are the industries which have much less inputs. Let's say they are in the bottom 10 percentile of inputs ratio, and then treat those industries as concentrated industries and compare those industries, the competitive industries which are in the top 98 percentile, which are most open, and can see whether there is, when I am interacting this with inputs, if this is changing or not in terms of the wage rates. You can do that easily in the SIs, easily with the SI data, because you can classify industries between concentrated and non-concentrated. You can then check with others below 25, above 75. This is the first paper, actually. That's why I said that trade and gender, the literature is pretty much new, because this is where Sandra Black. So if you want to look up gender more, you should look up Sandra Black. She is in Columbia University. She used to be Texas A&M. She has a lot of work on gender, different aspects of gender. Then Marian Bartand is in University of Chicago Booth School of Economics. And there is Oriana Bandera, who is in LSE. There is one more paper on Peru. They use, this is the paper on Peru, and they find, so they use the Chinese imports as the shock. China's association of the WTO as the empirical strategy they use as a shock to the Peruvian market in terms of globalization. And they use an IV, which is basically imports by neighboring nations rather than Peru, to correct for the endogeneity. Because that could be because Chinese imports might have increased because of the demand for certain industries rather than the supply side. Right? Certain industries which have, let's say, more females or less females might have somehow demanded more Chinese imports. This could have happened. So that's why they use the neighboring countries as the incremental variables for Peruvian goods. And they found actually opposite. So that's why I put this paper. So this is the Peruvian map, and they show by the map where the concentration of imports were higher. So the darker the blue is, the concentration of imports were higher. So there's a pretty much exogenous differences across regions. And what they find is actually in tradable sectors, female earnings and employment went down. Non-tradable actually went up because of Chinese exports, but female went down significantly. And also they found that in the informal sector, the female informal sector actually went down rather than, and male formal sector went up. So this is opposite evidence. Imports create stronger competitions, and this is driven by low educated women. Low educated women lose their jobs when there is higher import competition. Low educated male also, there's not consistent evidence, but there is bit of evidence, but for low women, consistent evidence in terms of losing their jobs. And this is very different by by US and Peru. Because can you think of economic reason why they found different effects of imports? See, why they found different effects of imports on US? The other paper that we just saw that they found that actually import inequality, female to male ratio going up in terms of employment. Peru found opposite. That women lose their jobs, low equity to women. It's just because they are in a different level of development. So US, when they are importing stuff, they are importing high quality stuff. When the Chinese competition hit the Peruvian market, it's a low price competition that is hitting the market. So to produce low price goods, there are two ways to compete, right? We all know in economics, one is maximizing revenue and improve the cost. The easy way to fire people, women who are low educated women to fire them. That's the easiest way to reduce your cost. That's what happened in Peru. When you have higher competition in the market, some people lost their jobs. And in this case in Peru, it was because it's patriarchal society. Women, lowly educated women lost their jobs with higher competition. This is so migration rates didn't change. This another one. I have few minutes, and then I would like to show another case study that I did. This is coming. So we did it from Chile. So Chile, why Chile first? It's a high-income country according to the World Bank, about 14,000 USD per capita, but simultaneously features a very severe gender gap. There is about employment gap about 23 percentage points, to 75% compared to 51% for women, which is very similar to other Latin American countries, and the pay gap for every man making $1, women earn for 58 cents. So about 42% of wage gap. It's huge. Given a country which is 14,000 USD, which is pretty much similar like China. China is little lesser than them now. The gender pay gap is very, very high. Other two reasons, diverse manufacturing sector they have, and Chile was the country with highest number of FTAs by 22. So Chile had a dictatorial, if you know Chile background, Chile had dictatorial regime during the 80s. They started coming to democracy from the early 90s. When they started coming to democracy from the early 90s, they started writing economic agreements with other countries to promote, to do an export-led development. When they started writing this, one of the first agreements they write was with actually Canada, 1996. We do not focus on Canada. The problem was with Canada, the FTA was not implemented. They wrote with Canada in 1996, but the FTA means all the tariffs will go to zero. All the tariffs. The tariffs I will trade it with Canada will go down to zero right after, but that happened with some administrative reason. It went up to zero in 2004, not in 1997. Then Chile go and write its first major FTA with Mexico in 1998, which were effect instantly entered, like all the tariffs had dropped down to zero immediately. And that agreement had about 98.3% of the products being traded. What Mexico, one of the a huge set of products they trade. On those products, they wrote a FTA with Mexico. You can see the median tariff before exports to Mexico was 14% and it dropped to zero. That not happened either way. And exports to Mexico, this is real level, it was about 2,786 pesos, 1,000 pesos, and it went up to 8,500 pesos. It is about 200% growth in exports from Chile to Mexico. So we utilize this to understand whether export market participation or again globalization of trade can have effect on women or not, or what kind. So the question very simple: do firms recognize gender composition of their employment in response to a trade shock? So we use this novel data on gender composition of employment and for several occupational categories, and then what we do, we matched with customs data from Chile. In a sense, we want to know that farm, that this happening only for a farm which is exporting to Mexico compared to other exporting farms or not. Because we want to identify the shock is coming from Mexico, not with every exporter. Okay, that's why we matched this with the customs data. As I said, there are mixed results. There is, we saw, mixed increased employment for the US farms, drop in employment for the Peruvian farms. In also export participation, this is for the import competition. In export participation, there is also mixed results. We find reduction in gap for blue collar workers for Mexican farms. This also paper, this is a Journal of Development Economics paper. You should see this paper as well. And there's an increase in gender gap for employment for US farms. In fact, for Norwegian farms, there is evidence on the increase in gender wage gap because what happens for the Norwegian, especially for the exporting farms, what they found very interesting. For the exporting farm, they found the gender wage gap actually increased. Why? Because they were exporting to nations where the nations were in the complete opposite time zones, where people have to work out of hours in the office. That's why women didn't work out of hours in the office, and men worked. Men, the share of wages or employment went down because they have to. These are exporters who are trading with people who are, let's say, Australia, completely different time zone. They're not trading much with Europe. That's why they found this complete opposite results in Norway for exporters. We could find, I guess, results because they are trading with Mexico, which is in the same time zone. Mexico and Peru is basically in the same time zone. So you do not find this opposite effect. When you're working across time zones, that can actually have an effect on gender wage gap as well, which is very interesting that time zones can affect gender gap in employment. So we use this data set from Statistical Institute Organization of Chile, which has plant level data like ASI, manufacturing firms, and you can see there are 7 occupation groups: owner, CEO, skilled workers, administrative workers, unskilled workers, services, function workers. And all of these subdivided into male and female. So we know across 7 categories how many males, how many females are there. And we basically concentrated on these 3 as the white collar workers: owner, CEO, skilled. Even if you drop owner, result doesn't change. And then we concentrate on this one as the blue collar workers, unskilled or the production workers. This is, yes, you're saying. Yes, yeah, I'll finish this and then we can, I'll quickly finish this. So this can see there is significant effect of the FTA effects on trade, significant increase both at the aggregate level and the farm level. And this is the share of white collar, female white collar workers. This is what we are concentrating on. It's only the exporters to Mexico that went up, the share, for about 16% were there, it went up to 20%. So there was 20% change. Nothing changed with other exporters, no change with non-exporters. It actually went down a bit. So what you can think of, what happened there? There has been reallocation. There's a possible reallocation from the non-exporters to the new exporters in the economy. When a farm participates in the export market, they, as you know, exporters pay differential wages than the non-exporters. Because where from all these women come from? They cannot come from the heaven, right? Suddenly they started coming down from up and started working. So there has been some bit of reallocation from non-exporting farms to the exporters because there are differential pays and a lot of things, others. You can see this is simple unconditional correlation between Mexican tariffs and employment, which is really what we find. You can find the lower the Mexican tariffs is, the higher the share of employment of female. The lower the tariffs is, the lower is the male employment. So we actually found in this case that the Mexican farms substituted male workers with female workers. This is very difficult. The literature hasn't found this. The substitution, what we found in Chile, the substitution when goes on, like in this only in the skilled workers category, that females were dropped and females were recruited more. There could be many reasons. Let me very standard DID kind of setup. I'm not going into all of this, just to show you the result. And you can see tariffs in Mexico, the change in the tariffs in Mexico, and if you're an exporter to Mexico, is actually we have a negative effect. Tariffs went down. This is exports. Sorry. It's the same, and it should be the same. This is female to male workers. Tariffs in the Mexico went down. If you are exporter to Mexico, you have a significant negative effect, and this is driven by new exporters to Mexico. The farms, new exporters means the farms who started exporting to Mexico after the trade agreements were signed, and this is incumbent. That means they are already exporting to Mexico. We find basically that effect is completely driven by the new exporters to Mexico. And why? How this has happened? And you can see this is pretty much across several industries. We divide it by industries. It's pretty much common across except motor vehicles and other transport equipment. These are the two industries we find opposite effects. Otherwise, it's more or less across every industry it has increased. So there could be a reallocation from these two industries which are maybe born physically demanding to the other sectors. Could be possible. We don't say much. Our referees want to say a lot. There is tons of robustness checks. I'm not going into it. So what happens? There's a substitution. You can see female to male workers went up the ratio, but when you're looking at only absolute value of male workers, it actually went down. So this is tariffs going down. This is also positive relationship, and this is going down. And if you look at where it is coming from, when we divide it by different white collar and blue collar, you can see this is coming from the skilled workers category for the skilled work, for the male workers in this. So in the skilled worker category, males were dropped and females were employed more when they participated more in the export market. And this is because of this technology. They used more technology, both domestic and foreign. There are more R&D went up, innovation, and there is huge amount of ad communication publicity expenses went up. All these are high cognitive in nature and less physically demanding. So the farms upgraded their technology in terms of using more high technology or new technological machines, and they needed more females because you don't need right now males, right? You can have more females. That's why female employment went down in those. And interestingly, we found the opposite. What we did, because we know the owners, we divide farms between female owner, which have greater than female, more than one female owner, rather than no female owner. It is driven by farms which have only male owners rather than female owners. We actually found the opposite. That here it's driven by male owners and male CEOs. The farms which are dominated by male CEOs and male owners, those driving female employment more rather than the female-owned or female CEO farms. So this is opposite of what the taste-based discrimination, actually discrimination theory, as I said, because here is opposite in a sense that the product, this is because these farms are participating in the export market, their profits are actually going up, not going down. Because it's not import market competition. Import market competition is for the Mexican farms. For the Chilean farms, it's actually an expanding their market access. So their profits are going up. And even though their profits are going up, they're driven even by male farms. There is a female owner farm. You can see there is effect on the female ownership as well, but it is about 1/3 of the male ownership. So we found actually the opposite of what the theory suggests. So we tested a lot of other mechanisms, wages. We couldn't do it much because it's not gender divided. We divided industries between female intensive, male intensive, not that difference. We wanted to show between labor demand, whether it's a labor demand or labor supply, what happens. Because labor supply can increase, right? Because it's Santiago, which is the capital for say. Suddenly some women can come to Santiago, shift and then become available. That can happen. It didn't happen. What we found is more on the labor demand story. We follow actually the concentrated and non-concentrated idea. And what we do is we divide industries between export competitive and non-export competitive. In a sense that we divided industries by technology. The firms, the industries which operate in the top percentile of technology, in a sense they use technology more in their production function. The literature says that in those industries, if female employment increases, because though for those industries, employment demand is very sticky, because you need very specific skills to get employed firms in those industries. So if the employment of those industries increase, that means actually a labor demand story works rather than a labor supply story, because that employment is extremely sticky. If you are working in the top 10 percentile of the technologically intensive industries, that employment is very sticky. So we found actually that to be true, that it actually went up in those export non-competitive and technological industries where there is more demand side story rather than supply side story. And we also found a bit actually,
Sir,
yes,
that was for non-exporting competitive industries.
come.
So if you come to the so if you look at the labor demand, then dividing between export competitive and non-export competitive.
So here what we did was, yes, so what we did was in this non-export competitive industries, we divided industries between technology intensive and non-technology. Also within that. So which are non-export competitive, they were not exporting before much. Even that we look at which are the technological industries and non-technological industries. Then we find basically technological industry, more intensive industries, the demand is going up. So there is a further, I forgot to write this, there's a further sub-classification here as well. And we found a bit of positive effect of sales obviously would go up, but what we found here is this interesting. Though the referees want us not to comment much on this because we don't know, because we found labor productivity went up. So we wanted to conclude that the reorganization of labor might have an effect on labor productivity, but the referees are against it. So we have to kind of, in the last revision, we have to write it differently, that you're arguing that this could also be possible because of the technological changes. Rather than, you cannot actually attribute this to only the organizational changes in employment, but because you show there's a significant technological change that happened within the firms, this could also drive labor productivity because we have better machines at hand right now to drive the labor productivity. So, but we found some little evidence on this. So this is a successful study that an FTA or a trade agreement can actually increase. So the entire drop in tariffs, what happens was the complete drop in tariffs led to 10% increase in female white collars ratio for the new exporters. And this is increases a clear substitution effect from male to female white collar categories. And this is mostly driven by investments of an exporter in non-productive tasks, which have interactive skills. In a sense, you are doing more innovation, R&D, you are investing more in, because you are exporter now, you have to go set up trade shops. So you want highly educated female to go talk in the trade shops because they have more soft skills, maybe better than the male. So the firms kind of substituted males with females in the high skill category. And these findings have relevant policy implications because it emphasizes the role of globalization in improving female labor force participation. This also optimum allocation of talents. Maybe there were males in those categories in the jobs of, let's say, marketing or stuff or promotional activities. Now they found out that these females can do better than this. So there's actually, you're increasing that your productivity because you're allocating talent in the proper job that they can do. For example, I'm giving this not to be an improvements in the gender gap. We have, obviously, if you build a macro model around this and think about the total welfare consequences, this can have a lot of welfare consequences because of the skill, increase in the skill and labor category of the females. Thank you. This is all I had to say. I have taken a lot of your time in terms of